There are men in this world, rare men, men who are never meant to blend in easily among the rest. In Aphorisms on the Wisdom of Life, Arthur Schopenhauer describes the journey of the man gifted with superior intelligence, the one who sees in every conversation a layer that others fail to notice. This man believes in the beginning that his perception will be welcomed. He thinks that simply laying out clearly what he sees will be enough to be heard with gratitude. But the more he speaks, the more distant he becomes. Every sharp sentence stirs up strange silences. Every precise analysis draws protective smiles. Among other men, he feels lonelier than he does in his own company. And that is how he learned to retreat into silence, into the only strategy that never betrayed him: discretion. Many of you watching this video might know exactly what I'm talking about. What if the very thing you've always considered your greatest virtue, the clarity, the perception, the intelligence, is precisely what has been costing you the best invitations, the best promotions, and the deepest affections of your life? Stop for a second. Think about the last time you said something brilliant at a crowded table. Maybe it was a family dinner, maybe a work meeting on a high floor in Manhattan, maybe a bar conversation on a Friday night. Remember that half second right before the praise? That tiny pause when the faces on the other side of the table seem to freeze before relaxing again. That half second is the subject of this video. In that fraction of time, something very ancient woke up inside every person there. It wasn't admiration, it was calculation. The other person's brain silently measured how much your sentence had diminished them. And you, without noticing, just paid an invisible bill that no one is going to charge you directly. You'll pay that bill weeks later, when the invitation doesn't arrive, when your name isn't mentioned on the list, when the position goes to someone more agreeable. Years later, he would write, in an entry from his notebooks of 1851, that showing superiority among ordinary men is sowing enemies with a smile on your face. The vast majority of people cannot tolerate being outdone. Not in beauty, not in money, not in reasoning. You can test this at any Wednesday lunch, in a half-full restaurant in the middle of the afternoon, with the waiter passing by in the background. Say a sentence sharper than the table's average. Watch the glass of water sweating between the other person's fingers. Watch the eyes drop down to the menu before the smile returns. That is where raw envy lives. The silent calculation. The comparison no one admits to making. He understood this phenomenon as one of the most constant and most disguised forces of human coexistence. He was right. Schopenhauer grew up surrounded by the merchant bourgeoisie of Hamburg in the late 18th century. His father was a wealthy and stern merchant. His mother, a writer who hosted literary salons where figures like Goethe were received. From childhood, he observed up close how cultured society functioned, how compliments were dosed according to usefulness, how people laughed at jokes they hadn't found funny. He learned, while still a boy, that there is a permanent theatre holding social life together, and that whoever doesn't understand that theatre ends up as an extra, even with all the talent in the world. In his diagnosis, the will, that blind impulse that moves everything in existence, manifests itself in human beings mainly as a desire for recognition. People don't want to be happy. They want to be admired. People don't want to be loved. They want to be envied. Once you grasp this point, all social behavior starts to make sense. The photos posted on Instagram at 11 at night, the financed cars in the building garage, the captions written in English to seem more sophisticated, the reservations at expensive restaurants booked for Thursday night just to make it onto the story. All of that is the will begging for applause. He observed this pattern when social media didn't even exist yet. He was describing a human constant. Only today, that constant has a bigger stage. Human vanity is insatiable, and for that reason, any glow coming from someone else is unsettling. You don't have to do anything wrong to bother others. You just have to exist competently. You just have to be praised once in front of the right people. You just have to receive a promotion. You just have to start speaking with more confidence in Monday morning meetings at 9, with the hum of the central air conditioning as the soundtrack. the world begins to silently reorganize itself against you, and by the time you notice, you're already surrounded by small, affectionate saboteurs, people who smile at you to your face and tear you down behind your back. It's not personal malice against you, it's the will trying to rebalance itself, like emotional gravity. And that's why he recommended something that seems counterintuitive. Weigh less, shine less, take up less space, not to erase yourself, but to protect yourself. The will, in Schopenhauerian metaphysics, is the ultimate substance of the universe. It moves through plants, animals, stars, and in human beings it takes the form of permanent restlessness. Man is never satisfied. When he gets one thing, he desires another. When he receives one compliment, he wants two. When he wins one position, he dreams of the next. This blind machinery has no destination. It exists only to keep turning. And precisely because it turns inside everyone at the same time, anyone who appears to be a step ahead automatically becomes a symbolic obstacle. You didn't ask to be an obstacle, you just move forward a little. But in a collective race with no finish line, getting ahead is already offense enough for the other runners. When you understand this mechanism, you stop wasting energy trying to convince people that you're good, that you deserve it, that you're not competing with anyone. That effort to explain is useless. Envy doesn't listen to arguments. It responds to visual cues. You reduce the cue and it calms down. You raise it and it attacks. It's almost like dealing with an animal with predictable behavior. You don't argue with the animal. You just adjust your own movement so you don't provoke it. Moralists talk about how man should be. He talked about how man is. From there, without illusions, he built a practical ethic that could function in the real world. The intelligent young man always makes the same mistake. He thinks life is a courtroom where merit will be recognized if he presents enough evidence. So he works hard, he studies a lot, he reads things no one else has read. He holds solid opinions on complex subjects. He wakes up at 6 in the morning, makes coffee in a small apartment, reads for half an hour before work. And when the moment comes for him to be heard, he speaks. He speaks with passion, with clarity, with depth. And he watches, baffled, as people change the subject, as no one quotes what he said afterward, as the credit for the idea, weeks later, comes out of someone else's mouth, paraphrased in a worse way, during a meeting he wasn't even invited to attend. The intelligent young man thinks injustice is a one-off error. In his voice, however, this appears as the rule, not the exception. The rule is that good ideas, said at the wrong moment, to the wrong ears, become ammunition against the one who said them. And the perceptive young man needs to learn this before he turns 30, or he'll arrive at 40 bitter and bewildered, believing the world owes him something. There's a phrase attributed to Schopenhauer that captures this trap. The first 40 years of life give us the text. The next 30 give us the commentary. The text is the raw experience, the sequence of mistakes, exposures, betrayals, sabotages, disappointments. The commentary is the late understanding of all that. The problem is that many people spend their entire lives in the text and never reach the commentary. They live being punished for being authentic without understanding why. This video is a shortcut. It's the commentary arriving before the entire text is written. It's a chance for you to save 10 or 15 years of social mistakes by learning right now one simple thing. Your intelligence doesn't need an audience. It needs protection. And here we arrive at the central concept that gives all of this its name, the fool's mask. It is not a poetic metaphor. It is a technique. Schopenhauer is not asking you to lie about who you are. He's asking you to choose not to reveal everything. There is an important ethical difference between lying and omitting. Maybe the word lying has been used incorrectly by people for centuries. The correct term, although no one uses it, is constructing a false image. To omit is simply not to deliver the whole image. The wise man omits. He answers vaguely when asked about his plans. He plays dumb when the topic is dangerous. He pretends not to have noticed the gossip, so he won't be called on to give an opinion. He smiles when someone else's argument is weak, instead of tearing it down with 3 sentences. To save on enemies. Because the wise man understood that every enemy avoided is a guaranteed night of sleep, and nights of sleep are worth more than rhetorical victories in conversation circles. This mask has an interesting side effect. When you hide part of your intelligence, people relax around you, and when they relax, they show who they really are. The gossiper gossips more. The envious one lets envy slip out. The manipulator reveals the manipulation. You start collecting information about who's around you while they think they're dealing with someone ordinary. That is the silent gain of playing the fool. You're not being deceived. You're being informed. And information, when stored with patience, becomes real power. He deeply admired the Spanish Jesuit Baltasar Gracian, who lived in the 17th century, so much so that he translated one of his works into German. That work is The Pocket Oracle and the Art of Prudence, written in 1647. Gracian wrote 300 aphorisms on how to navigate life in courts and hostile environments. In almost all of them, the central theme returns. Don't reveal everything. Don't show your limits. Don't announce your strategy. Let them think you know more than you know. Let them think you know less than you know. In both cases, you have the advantage. Schopenhauer absorbed this Spanish lesson and turned it into an ethic of inner discretion. Where Gracian spoke of courts and noblemen, he spoke of bourgeois salons and German universities. But the principle was the same. The man who is too visible is the vulnerable man. Notice how silence starts to take on a different nature once you understand this. Before, silence seemed like a lack of courage, a lack of personality, a lack of something to say. Now silence is full of observation, of calculation, of discernment. Whoever speaks little observes a lot. Whoever observes a lot understands the game. Whoever understands the game stops being a piece and starts being a player. That inner transition is one of the deepest changes a human being can make. And it almost never happens before the age of 30. Because before that, the ego still demands an audience. After 30, if you've had some luck and some hard knocks, the ego starts to grow tired. And silence begins to look attractive for the first time. Think of someone you admire for being whole, not for appearance, not for money, not for empty charisma. Someone of dense presence. You'll notice a common trait in all of them. They speak less than average. They don't rush to fill pauses. They don't pad silence with nonsense. They listen all the way through before responding. And when they do respond, they answer with a few carefully chosen words. That is the visible effect of an invisible technique. Whoever masters silence masters the room. Whoever masters the room never has to shout. Strength arrives before the sound. But there is an even more unsettling layer to this mechanism, and it appears when you look at the specific kind of person who suffers most from unnecessary exposure. I'll get there in a few minutes. First, we need to talk about something almost no one is willing to look at head-on. Every word spoken is a piece of the board handed over to the other player. Think about it. How many times have you been hurt by something you yourself revealed? That plan you shared at the Friday happy hour, with the cold beer in your hand and the waiter cleaning the next table over, and then someone stole the idea. That hurt you confided, which later became an inside joke at the office. That vulnerability you opened up to someone you thought trustworthy, and months later it came back out of the wrong mouth, in the wrong tone, at the wrong moment. Every one of those situations could have been avoided with a single decision: don't say it. He noted with quiet irony, in one of the essays gathered in Parerga und Paralipomena from 1851, that the open mouth is the first door to defeat. When you review your life, you'll discover that practically all of your great social humiliations began with something you yourself handed over for free. Information about you is your most valuable asset, and you've been handing it out like free samples at a neighborhood bakery. Alongside the 8 o'clock breakfast, there is a specific type of person who feels especially threatened by those who think. It's the person who carries, deep down, a fragile self-esteem. They can't be around good people without feeling diminished. So they attack, but with sophistication. They don't attack head-on. They attack in small doses. They make acid comments disguised as jokes, during the 3 o'clock coffee break. They diminish your accomplishments with a small smile while typing on their phone without looking at you. They question your choices with innocent-sounding questions. They spread a subtle narrative about you in conversations you'll never hear, in a WhatsApp group where typing appears and disappears without anyone sending anything. In his essays on human conduct, he considered envy the most universal and most hidden of human vices. No one admits to envying, but everyone envies. And whoever shows any kind of visible superiority unknowingly awakens that venom disguised as kindness. Envy is especially dangerous because it doesn't announce itself. You find out late. You find out when you lose the opportunity you were about to receive, when the invitation doesn't come, when a door closes for no apparent reason. And when you try to figure out what happened, you realize that someone, somewhere, planted a small sentence, a twisted adjective, a light insinuation during lunch on some random Thursday. And that was enough. The envious one is like an animal that attacks during sleep. You don't see the strike, you just wake up with the wound. That's why he recommended an almost paranoid stance toward ordinary people, not in the pathological sense, in the practical sense. Always assume that someone might be envying you and adjust your exposure accordingly. You don't need to hide who you are. You just need to avoid rubbing who you are in the face of those who don't have what you have. This principle explains something most people take decades to understand. Why so many people sabotaged you in life for no apparent reason. Why that boss harassed you even though you did good work. Why that college classmate never recommended you for anything. Why that childhood friend vanished when you started to progress. In almost all of those cases, there was no fight. There was no misunderstanding. There was no visible cause. There was only your existence occupying a space those people wished they occupied. And since they couldn't knock you down directly, they corroded you from the side. When you understand this mechanism, you stop looking for fault in yourself. Maybe you weren't the one who did something wrong. Maybe it was, deep down, your brilliance that wounded their ego. And that kind of wound has no forgiveness. Accepting this is painful, but liberating. It lifts from your shoulders the obligation to please everyone. You will never be able to. The higher you rise, the more people will want to see you fall. Not because you're evil, because you're alive, and other people's lives have been going worse than yours. He states, with brutal honesty, that most of human happiness comes from comparison. People don't want to be well. They want to be better than someone. And when you improve, automatically, someone gets worse by comparison. You become, without fault, a source of pain for those people. And they will punish you for it. That is the price of any ascent. You have to pay that price in silence, without complaining, without playing the victim, without trying to be understood. The loneliness of the lucid man appears precisely there. The higher the intellect, the more solitary the path. Not because the wise man chooses solitude, because it is an unavoidable consequence of depth. Deep people don't feel comfortable in shallow conversations. People who think for hours aren't interested in 5-minute small talk in the office building elevator, with the mechanical sound of the doors opening on the 12th floor. People who question everything can't fake enthusiasm for trivialities. And since most human social time is made up of trivialities, the deep man finds himself almost always alone. Even when surrounded by people, that loneliness can crush if misinterpreted, or it can strengthen if rightly understood. He wrote that the deep man needs to make peace with his own company, because society isn't going to offer worthy peers very often. And that is one of the hardest truths to swallow. Most people will see you as strange. They'll feel uneasy around you without knowing why. They'll prefer your simplified version, your light social side, your jokes, your distributed compliments. But they won't want to meet you at the level where you live on the inside. And you need to stop demanding that of them. It's not malice. It's not a lack of affection. It's an incompatibility of depth. No amount of goodwill resolves incompatibility. Once you accept that, loneliness stops being a lack and becomes a territory, a place where you live with yourself. And in that territory, no one diminishes you, no one misinterprets you, no one demands justifications. Pay attention to an important distinction. Wise solitude is not sick isolation. Sick isolation runs from people, feels fear of closeness, is a symptom. Wise solitude chooses its people, feels peace in their absence, is a strategy of inner preservation. When you develop a taste for your own company, you stop accepting just any company. You become selective, and being selective is one of the clearest signs of maturity there is. You start noticing, within a few minutes of conversation, whether the person in front of you is worth your time. And when they aren't, you withdraw without drama, without burning bridges, without making a scene, without explaining. You simply retreat inward, keeping the smile on the outside. Here is the beautiful paradox of the fool's mask. Whoever appears ordinary moves freely through environments without arousing suspicion, observes without being observed, learns without being noticed, acts without being anticipated. While the vain wear themselves out trying to impress, the camouflaged wise man accumulates knowledge about them. The Chinese general Sun Tzu, more than 2,000 years before Schopenhauer, already wrote in The Art of War that appearing weak when you are strong is the height of strategy. The two traditions, separated by centuries and continents, arrived at the same conclusion. The man who shows less than he has always holds an advantage over the man who shows more than he is. That convergence is not a coincidence. We call it a coincidence out of laziness, but it is the confirmation of a practical law of human existence. One of the most immediate applications of that law is being careful with your plans. What you intend to do should not be announced before it is done. This principle is violated by nearly everyone, every day. People announce diets they're going to start on Monday. They announce books they're going to write on Twitter on Sunday night. They announce businesses they're going to open. They announce changes they're going to make. And in 90% of cases, those plans die right there at the announcement. There is a psychological explanation for this, demonstrated by the psychologist Peter Gollwitzer in studies starting in the year 2000, especially a 2009 experiment called When Intentions Go Public. When you announce an intention publicly, your brain receives the social reward as if the goal had already been accomplished, and it loses a great deal of the drive needed to actually execute it. Schopenhauer didn't have those studies at hand, but he had a sharp observation of the same phenomena. For him, the mature man guards his plans the way he guards money, in secret, in a safe place, away from prying eyes. Because announced plans attract judgment from people who will say, with protective smiles at Sunday lunch, that you won't pull it off. They attract the silent envy of those who will feel, deep down, that you're trying to rise above them. They attract the sabotage of those who will, consciously or unconsciously, boycott you so that you fail. Announcing a plan is creating 3 simultaneous enemies before you've even taken the first step. The wise man doesn't do this. He simply disappears into the work and reappears with the finished result. Then, yes, the result speaks. And the result speaks louder than any promise. There is a classic scene that illustrates this principle. The American writer Cormac McCarthy spent decades writing in nearly total anonymity. He lived in cheap motels in Tennessee and later in Texas with very little money, giving no interviews, attending no literary parties. He just wrote. The yellow light of the lamp over the typewriter, the silence of rented rooms, the thin walls, the ceiling fan in the southern summer. When recognition finally came, late, with works like Blood Meridian and The Road, the world discovered an already fully formed writer, dense, definitive. He hadn't spent 20 years announcing he would be great. He had spent 20 years being great in silence. That pattern repeats itself in almost all of the most solid figures of Western culture. The mediocre announce. The great deliver. And here comes the question that changes everything. The one most people take a lifetime to ask. Why do we keep performing a larger version of ourselves for an audience that, in truth, isn't even paying attention? As this video moves forward, a figure begins to take shape. The figure of the mature Schopenhauerian man. He is not the aggressive man who crushes others. He is not the servile man who pleases everyone. He is the discreet man who understands the game but doesn't play it compulsively, who sees people's vanity but doesn't expose it, who knows more than he shows, who smiles when needed, but without handing over his soul in the smile, who holds strong opinions but keeps them for the right ears, who is kind but not naive, who is firm but not showy. That figure is rare but exists, and once you start recognizing this type of person, you realize they are quietly in charge of a lot in the world, not in loud command, in real command, the one that decides without having to shout the decision. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the first pinned comment. To reach that figure, you have to go through a painful inner transformation. You have to die a little to the person you were. Specifically, you have to let die that part of you that still wants to be understood by others. That part is the hardest to let go, because it is ancient. It comes from childhood. It comes from the natural desire to be loved and recognized by your parents, your classmates, your teachers. When you become an adult, that part stays alive. It only changes audiences. Now, it wants to be recognized by bosses, friends, lovers, social media at 11:30 at night, with the face lit up by the blue light of the phone on the pillow. But it's the same child, wanting a hug that confirms it exists and matters. Maybe it's not maturity that part is looking for. Maybe, deep down, it's just confirmation. Many adults die still being that child, still demanding that the world confirm their worth. And the world, of course, never confirms enough. The inner shift happens when you decide, consciously, that your worth will no longer depend on external validation. That decision is not a thought. It is an act. You have to practice. You have to do things without telling anyone. You have to have small secret victories. You have to collect internal proofs of competence that no one has applauded. Little by little, your nervous system learns that applause is not necessary, that you can exist well, fully, without needing the audience. That learning takes years, but from the moment it begins, your life changes in an irreversible direction. You become light. You stop measuring hours by likes. You stop evaluating the day by the number of compliments received. You start living inward. And living inward is the beginning of real freedom. The freedom that comes from no longer needing to prove anything is hard to describe to someone still trapped in validation. It's like trying to describe color to someone who sees in black and white. You talk, but the person doesn't understand. They think they understand, but they're just translating your words into the only reality they know. To understand that freedom, you have to feel it. To feel it, you have to walk through the emptiness that comes when you stop seeking applause. That emptiness is frightening. For days, weeks, maybe months, you feel smaller, quieter, less important. You leave the office at 7 in the evening, walk down the street, and notice that no one is looking at you, and that this is no longer a tragedy. It is a relief. You crossed over. There is a historical example that illustrates this crossing beautifully. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who reigned in the 2nd century of our era, wrote to himself, over the course of years, a philosophical journal that was later called Meditations. He never wanted to publish that journal. He wrote only to remind himself of principles he needed to cultivate. When you read the text, you notice that it is full of self-advice. Remember not to seek fame. Remember that the opinion of others doesn't matter. Remember that everything passes, including applause. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world at the time. He could have any recognition he wanted, and even so, he needed to remind himself, every day, not to depend on recognition. That shows the size of the inner work required. Even an emperor had to fight that pull daily. Schopenhauer cites Marcus Aurelius in several moments with admiration, because he understood that this kind of inner work is what separates the ordinary man from the man who lives with weight. The ordinary man reacts. The mature man chooses. The ordinary man takes offense. The mature man observes. The ordinary man needs to respond to everything. The mature man can ignore almost everything. That capacity to ignore is perhaps the greatest achievement of emotional maturity. You start owing no responses to strangers, no explanations to the curious, No justifications to the envious. You simply move on. And the simplicity of moving on is a kind of freedom few attain. There is a specific type of person, however, who suffers more with all of this than anyone else. And it isn't who you're thinking of. It isn't the shy one. It is precisely the opposite. It is the charismatic, articulate person with intelligence above average, who learned from a young age that speaking well opens doors. That person became addicted to the effect of their own voice on others, and now, in middle age, discovers that this addiction has been charging a high price. I'll come back to that figure later. First, we need to talk about how to handle, day to day, the people who drain your energy. Maybe life won't give you the option of avoiding those people entirely. You'll have to live with them at work, in your family, in marriages, in elevators. They'll be there, and the way you handle them will determine much of your inner peace. In the aphorisms, he gives a direct piece of advice. Don't argue with fools. Don't try to convince them. Don't expose yourself trying to make points to those who can't grasp nuance. What seems, at first glance, like arrogant advice is actually advice on self-preservation. Every argument with a fool drains your energy. Every attempted explanation to a closed mind ages you on the inside. Every misdirected effort to convince is a piece of your life you will never get back. The practical technique is the technique of surface agreement. When someone says nonsense to you, you smile, nod slightly, say something neutral like interesting or that makes sense, and then you change the subject or move away or redirect. You're not lying, you're just saving energy. The truth that person would need to hear isn't going to be heard anyway. Spending breath on them is like shouting underwater in a swimming pool. The sound comes out muffled and no one understands. The wise man learns that there are conversations that shouldn't happen, topics that shouldn't be touched, people with whom you should keep the relationship at the surface, forever, without ever going down even an inch. And that's all right. Maybe it isn't insincerity. Maybe, deep down, it's filtering. It's choosing where to invest your depth. There's a classic scene in the dialogues of Socrates, recorded by Plato, that illustrates this. Socrates spent his days talking with people in Athens, asking questions that exposed the contradictions in their reasoning. That was his method, and look where it got him. He was sentenced to death by the very citizens of Athens under vague accusations, fundamentally because he disturbed the vanity of the right people. Schopenhauer cites this episode as a warning. Even the greatest philosopher in Western history, with all his wisdom and prudence, couldn't protect himself from the collective poison when he exposed too much. Imagine yourself then. Imagine me. Imagine any ordinary person trying to teach truths in hostile environments. You'll be socially killed long before being heard. The lesson is old and clear. Keep your wisdom for those who have an ear for it. And even in those cases, offer it in small doses. The patience of the observer is another essential virtue on this path. Letting the other person reveal themselves first. In any new social situation, in any relationship that begins, in any work environment you enter, the rule is to listen more than you speak, especially in the first weeks, especially in the first months. People will give themselves away. They will tell you whom they like and whom they don't. They will reveal their hurts, their envious ones, their alliances, their obsessions. All of that is precious information. You can only gather that information if you stay quiet and attentive. If you speak first, tell your stories first, expose your positions first, you lose two things. You lose the informational advantage, and you lose control over the narrative they will construct about you. Whoever speaks last speaks with more information. That principle applies to everything, to business negotiations, to romantic conversations, to family disputes, to job interviews in glass buildings downtown, with the fluorescent light of meeting rooms and the faint smell of reheated coffee coming from the break room. In all those contexts, whoever stays strategically silent in the first moments collects data that completely changes the game. And when they finally speak, they speak with surgical precision. They say exactly what is necessary. They don't waste words. They don't reveal extra cards. They don't give away unsolicited information. That precision carries a silent authority that no volume of words can produce. People start listening to you with more attention precisely because you speak less. It's a reverse economy. The less you spend on words, the more your words are worth. There's an old saying that goes, "Man speaks with his mouth, but the wise man speaks with his silence." That saying, quoted in different forms across various philosophical traditions, captures the essence of what he taught. Silence communicates authority. It communicates self-control. It communicates inner density. When someone talks a lot, they transmit the sense that they need to convince. When someone talks little, they transmit the sense that they are already convinced. People who are already convinced attract more respect than people trying to convince. It's an almost biological principle of social hierarchy. The animals that dominate a group are generally the quietest. They don't need to bark. Their presence alone is enough. In humans, the equivalent is the dense presence of the one who speaks little and looks at you for a long time. The difference between the wise man and the show-off also needs to be made clear. The wise man is the one who knows and stays silent. The show-off is the one who knows little and talks a lot. He observed with irony that the more a person needs to demonstrate intelligence, the more likely they are to be insecure in that intelligence. The true wise man has no such hurry. He knows that he knows. He doesn't need the other person to confirm it. His inner certainty doesn't require external applause. That's why he can listen to nonsense without getting irritated. He can hear flimsy theories without feeling compelled to correct them. He can stand in front of mistaken people without needing to redeem them. He saves energy where the show-off wastes it. That contrast becomes most visible in professional environments. Who hasn't been in a meeting where the loudest person was also the emptiest? Where the quietest person in the corner, with the pen resting on the open notebook, was actually the one who understood the subject best? That pattern has become almost a corporate cliché. People who need to appear intelligent are rarely the most intelligent. People who genuinely master a subject don't feel the urgency to prove it every 5 minutes. They observe, they analyze, they wait for the right moment, and when they intervene with a few sentences that change the direction of the conversation. That is the sign of real authority. It doesn't come from volume, it comes from precision. Schopenhauer saw society as a great stage. That vision of his has an important origin. He read deeply Calderón de la Barca, the 17th century Spanish playwright, author of a play called The Great Theatre of the World. In it, God is the author, life is the stage, and each human being receives a role to perform before dying. He carried that metaphor into philosophy. For him, social life is literally performance. People wear masks all the time. Most compliments are false, smiles are protocol, concerns for others' well-being are performative. Once you understand this, you stop taking yourself seriously inside the theatre, and that's where true social wisdom begins. Playing the fool from that perspective is simply choosing a safer role within the theatre. Instead of playing the protagonist that everyone wants to bring down, you play the likable supporting character no one really notices. You move between scenes without drawing attention. You collect your paycheck, make your choices, live your life, without having to get involved in the side plots of envy, intrigue, and rivalry that consume the other actors. That choice is not lesser. It's more sophisticated. The protagonists burn out. The intelligent supporting characters accumulate reserves. And when the act ends, the invisible supporting character has more health, more sleep, more energy, and more savings than the exhausted protagonist who tried to shine in every scene. There's a phrase that both George Orwell and Cyril Connolly helped circulate in the 30s and 40s, and that appears word for word in Coming Up for Air, the novel Orwell published in 1939. It says that inside every fat man, there is a thin man trying to get out. But the truth of maturity is the opposite. Inside every brilliant man, there is a discreet man trying to emerge. When the discreet one finally defeats the brilliant one, life becomes calmer. Not because the brilliance lessens, because it stops asking for an audience. And a life that doesn't ask for an audience is a life with much more room for itself. You discover, in time, that your level of happiness increases in a strange way when you become invisible to most people. You start having mornings of your own. You have hours of your own. You have thoughts of your own that never became content, never became conversation, never became anything. They just existed. And that existence without a witness has a flavor that an exposed life never offers. Think carefully about the people you consider silent winners. That aren't no one quite understood, who lived a simple life in the suburbs, with the well-kept garden and the cat sleeping on the windowsill, but who always seemed at peace. That old teacher who was never famous, but whom every student remembers with affection. That discreet neighbor who never shared his plans, but who at 60 had everything in order, the house paid off, the children educated, retirement secured, and still drove the same old car from 2 decades ago. Those people aren't on social networks. They don't give interviews. They don't write books. They don't make noise. But they live with a density the famous would envy if they knew. They mastered, without knowing they had mastered it, the wisdom he taught. They stayed silent. They worked. They waited. And they harvested in silence. That is the final model. Coming back to the figure I mentioned earlier, the charismatic man addicted to his own voice. That character shows up a lot in the American corporate world, in the tech sector on the West Coast, in open offices with glass walls and imported espresso machines. He is well liked. He is promoted. He is invited to everything. And, in middle age, he discovers that he has exhausted everyone around him with his own presence. Friends disappeared, worn out. Romantic relationships didn't last. Important meetings began to be scheduled without him. He doesn't understand what happened. He just noticed at some point that the echo of his own voice on the walls of the room had become discomfort. That is the fate of those who never learn to dose themselves, and it is the fate you are here to avoid. Here, a figure appears that needs to be named clearly. The wise man who laughs on the inside. That is the Schopenhauerian man in his most mature version. He understands the game, but he doesn't play it compulsively. He sees the vanity of others, but he doesn't expose it in public. He knows more than he shows, and he shows only what's necessary. When he hears nonsense, he doesn't correct it. He just notes it mentally. When he sees manipulation, he doesn't confront it. He just moves away. When he realizes he's being underestimated, he doesn't react. He just goes on being underestimated, because he knows that being underestimated is one of the most useful advantages there is. Whoever is underestimated has more room to act. Whoever is overestimated has more enemies to manage. That wise man laughs on the inside because he notices, in every social interaction, how hard people work to be seen, admired, valued, and how much that effort consumes them. He has already been through that phase. He already spent years trying to be perceived. He already wore himself out trying to be recognized. And he discovered, after a lot of wear and tear, that peace doesn't lie in the perception of others. Peace lies in no longer needing it. When he finally reached that point, he became a permanent observer. He sees others running after what he has already abandoned, and he feels at the same time compassion and lightness. Compassion for those who still suffer with the game. Lightness from having stepped out of it. That combination is perhaps the highest inner state he described in all of his work. How do you begin this transformation in practice? It doesn't happen overnight. It is a gradual process with small daily adjustments that over months and years build a new man. The first adjustment is the simplest and the most transformative. Speak less. It doesn't mean going mute, it means dosing. In every conversation, ask yourself internally whether that sentence really needs to be said. Whether it adds something, whether it reveals something that could be preserved, whether it serves you or just the impulse of the moment. That internal check, done hundreds of times throughout the day, slowly re-educates your communication system. Within a few months, you speak half of what you used to, and your life changes. Then comes the exercise of observing with dilated attention. When you speak less, attention is left over, and that attention can be directed to what's around you. The gestures of people on the subway at 8 in the morning, with their eyes closed and the white earbuds visible in their ears. The The small silences in meetings, the chosen words in emails that are too short, the facial reactions in elevators, the inconsistencies between what someone says and what they do. You start noticing layers that used to pass you by. That perception gives you a permanent informational advantage. You start understanding people faster than they understand themselves. And when you understand someone before they understand themselves, you're always a step ahead in the interaction, not to manipulate, to protect yourself, and to choose better where to invest your presence. The third habit is to keep your plans to yourself. This is perhaps the hardest one for modern man, who lives in a culture of compulsory exposure. Everything you do seems to demand documentation. You run on the treadmill, you post it. You read, you post it. You travel, you post the airport photo with the caption in English. You decide something, you announce it on the story at 8 at night with background music. He would laugh sadly at our error. Because every post is a free handover of information to an audience that is mostly indifferent, partially envious, and occasionally hostile. The modern wise man learns to live with certain areas of life in invisible mode. His big bets, his deepest studies, his most important affections, his long-term projects, all of that stays out of the audience's reach. And that preserved privacy generates an inner strength that accumulates over time. And finally, perhaps the hardest one, choosing whom to show yourself fully to. There are few people in the world worthy of seeing you without a mask. Maybe 3, maybe 5, rarely more than that. Those people are the only ones to whom you should show your depth. To everyone else, offer only what's necessary. It isn't insincerity, it's preservation. Think of a rare wine. You don't serve a 50-year-old wine in a plastic cup to an audience that will drink without paying attention. You open the wine on the right occasion, for the right palates, and let every sip be savored. Your soul is like that. It isn't served in a disposable cup. It is served with ceremony to those who know how to drink. When you implement those adjustments, your life begins to change in a way that is hard to anticipate. You become more respected without having asked for respect, more listened to without having spoken more sought after without having offered yourself. That paradox is one of the most beautiful findings of Schopenhauerian practice. The less you show yourself, the more people want to see you. The less you justify yourself, the more your word carries weight. The less you give of yourself, the more value each piece given carries. It's an economy of scarcity. In a world where everyone exposes themselves for free, whoever preserves themselves automatically becomes rare, and rarity has a value that abundance can never reach. Schopenhauer died sitting on his sofa on a September morning in 1860 in his house in Frankfurt, alone the way he had lived. During his lifetime, he was little read, ignored by academia, ridiculed by the Hegelians who dominated German philosophy at the time. Only in the last 9 years before his death, after the publication of Parerga und Paralipomena, did he finally begin to be read with attention. And then he grew posthumously until he became one of the most influential voices in history. He influenced Nietzsche, Tolstoy, Wagner, Thomas Mann, Freud, Borges, and dozens of other giants of Western culture. The irony is complete. The man who preached discretion, silence, and the avoidance of seeking recognition lived without recognition himself. And precisely because he lived that way, without giving in to the desire to be admired in his own lifetime, he built a work that survived intact through time. The famous philosophers of his era are now almost forgotten. He, the discreet one, is read on every continent. There is a final lesson inside that biography. The things built in silence tend to last longer than the things built with applause. Applause is fast fuel. Silence is deep root. Applause puts you at the top for a moment. Silence sustains you at that height for decades. Almost everything worthwhile in human life is built in the absence of an audience. Good marriages are made in conversations no one hears. In the kitchen at 11 at night, with the dinner dishes stacked and the smooth coffee maker already turned off. Good parenting is built through small daily corrections no one sees. Good careers are made of nights of studying, early mornings, discreet decisions. The people who manage to do this, without needing to post or comment, live another quality of life, deeper, denser, more real. The decision this video invites you to make, now, at the end, is simple and costly at the same time. Speak less, observe attentively, guard what you know, show yourself only to those who are worthy. That decision is not going to make you unpleasant. It is going to make you mysterious, dense, intriguing. It is not going to isolate you. It is going to select for you. The wrong people will drift away from you on their own because they can no longer decipher you the way they used to. And the right people will come closer with genuine curiosity because they sense that there is something there worth getting to know. That natural filter is the most valuable gift of the fool's mask. You don't need to cut anyone out. You just need to stop handing yourself over. The rest adjusts itself over the months. The true wisdom of pretending to be a fool isn't in pretending to be nothing. It's in choosing what to show of yourself and to whom. It's understanding that preserved intelligence grows while displayed intelligence wears down. It's realizing that silence is one of the most sophisticated forms of presence. It's accepting the loneliness of those who think more than the average, and using that loneliness as a territory of strengthening. In the end, it's laughing on the inside at a world that wears itself out chasing applause. Schopenhauer doesn't offer you a formula for success. He offers you a way of existing with weight, with dignity, with peace, in the midst of the noise. Whoever understands that offer and has the courage to practice it will discover that life starts making more sense from the day it makes less noise. Did you enjoy this content? Join our members club with exclusive videos. See you next time.